You're live.
Want me to start again? Shall I start again?
Yes, you should, because otherwise no one will be composed.
Sorry, folks, I've got to start this again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, again. Welcome to the special meeting of West Berkshire Council's Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Howard Waterston, the Vice Chairman of the committee, and I'm standing in as Chairman for Councillor Eric Patterson, who is absent. I'm joined at this meeting by my fellow committee members, Councillors Dominic Bowick, Billy Drummond, Owen Jeffrey, Janine Lewis, David Marsh, and Chris Reid. Councillor David Southgate, attending as Parish Council representative on Zoom, is able to participate fully in the meeting, but will not be able to vote on the matter. I'm supported on this committee by Nikki Thomas as the legal representative, Stephen Chard, who will be keeping a record of the meeting, and by Sam Chiverton, the Zoom host. We are not anticipating any alarm tests this evening, although if the fire alarm does sound, we must leave the building immediately. Please exit by the safe emergency exit route. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain in the chamber and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it's safe to proceed. Do we have any apologies?
Chairman, yes, I think firstly I'll just say that Councillor Jeremy Cottam, who has arrived a little late, we did it. He has unfortunately has arrived, so welcome, Jeremy. But the actual apologies, though, Councillor Eric Patterson, as you say, Chairman, and Councillor Laura Coyle, Councillor Janine Lewis is attending as substitute.
I'm proposing to take in declarations of interest that anybody that already knows either Councillor Vickers or ex-Councillor Steve Masters, that's accepted. Are there any others? I would like to state that I've received a copy of Councillor Vickers' email when it was circulated, and I was also on the chat discussion, so I was aware of that. But I've consulted with the monitoring officer, and she does not see that as a problem. Members, I've received a request from one of the subject members to amend the order of the agenda items. I am minded to approve that request on the understanding that it is acceptable to both subject members and all other parties will be present for the duration of the proceedings. We will therefore commence with agenda item 4. And I would therefore, so I just explain this item is in relation to a complaint made by Councillor. Bear with me. Yes, is by Mr. Steve Masters, formerly Councillor Masters, about Councillor Ross McKinnon.
It's been reordered.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay. Yeah, my apologies. Start again. This item is in relation to a complaint made by Councillor Tony Vickers about Councillor Ross McKinnon of West Berkshire Council. Before we proceed any further on this item, consideration is to be given to exclude the press and public from this meeting. May I ask the legal advisor present for advice on this point?
Thank you, Chairman. It's the usual assumption that the Governance Committee will be held in public on the basis that the incident complained of took place in public. There does not appear to be any confidential information contained in the papers that may prejudice either the complainant or the subject member, and therefore the advice is that the meeting would ordinarily take place in public.
Does anyone wish to make a representation on this point? Councillor Pagg.
Thank you, Chairman, and to you, Nikki. Much of the matter in item, the first item, is this appropriate to talk about that right now?
So the first item on the agenda is in relation to the complainant from Councillor Tony Vickers.
Okay. So are we agreeing now then that the whole meeting will be held in public?
No, we consider on each item.
Thank you.
Confirmation of attendance. The independent investigator, Mr. Richard Lingard, is in attendance virtually to present his report. The complaining Councillor Vickers is in attendance, accompanied by Councillor Jeff Brooks. And the subject member, Councillor McKinnon, is in attendance. Do the parties want to make representations?
I have nothing further to add, Chairman,
Okay.
but I'm obviously here if members wish to question me.
I would with respect like to remind all those present that we're here to discuss the complaint as set out in the agenda pack. I would ask all those making representations to the meeting to ensure that all comments and questions are limited to the issues relevant to the allegations being considered as part of this complaint. The format of both proceedings will be as follows. The independent investigator will present his report to the committee, after which members of the committee will be able to ask questions to elaborate on further details. The complainant and then the subject member may ask the chairman to direct any appropriate questions to the independent investigator. Following this, the complainant will put forward their case, outlining issues that are detailed in the investigator's report that are disputed. There will then be an opportunity for the committee members to ask questions of the complainant. The complainant may also introduce any witness required to substantiate any matter outlined in the report that they have disputed. The committee will also have the opportunity to ask questions of the witness. Finally, the subject member will put his case forward, outlining any matters within the investigator's report that are disputed. The committee will then ask questions of the representative. The subject member may also introduce any witness required or substantiate any matter outlined in the report that they have disputed. The committee will also have the opportunity to ask questions of that witness. Please note the parties are not permitted under this procedure to engage in cross-examination of the other parties. However, if you have any point of order that you would like to make, please raise your hand and direct your question to me as chairman. Once all parties have made their representations, the committee may request a party to clarify any issues raised. The subject member will be given the final opportunity to speak to the committee for this purpose. Once all representations have been heard, the committee has asked all the questions they wish to, the meeting will be adjourned, and I will ask all other parties to leave the chamber so the committee can make a determination in private as to whether or not a breach of the West Berkshire Council's Code of Conduct has occurred. In order to save time for everybody, I'm proposing we will join the two together. So we will not go through that route until we've also heard the other one. The meeting will then be reconvened and I will read out a brief statement as to whether or not the committee has determined if a breach has occurred. A detailed written decision notice will be issued after the meeting, but within 5 working days, which will fully set out the reasons for the decision of the committee. If the committee determines that no breach has occurred, this will be the end of the meeting. If the committee determines that the breach has occurred, the committee will hear representations from the legal representative as to whether the committee should take any action against the councillor and what form any sanction should take. The subject member will then be able to make representations by way of mitigation and to comment as to which sanctions may be most appropriate. The meeting will once again be adjourned and I will ask all parties to leave the chamber so that the committee can make a determination in private as to which sanctions should be applied. The meeting will then be reconvened and I will confirm the sanctions to be proposed. As already advised, a detailed written decision notice will be issued after the meeting, but within 5 working days, which will fully set out the reasons for the decision of the committee. In order to ensure this matter is dealt with in a timely and appropriate manner, please can I remind participants that any comments should be limited to the complaint under consideration as set out in the agenda. Committee members have had the opportunity to read the written submissions and you do not therefore need to repeat comments detailed in the agenda. Please, however, highlight any key issues detailed within the agenda that you wish to draw members' attention to. May I finally also remind you that any questions by the party should be asked through the chair and questions should be asked for the purpose of clarifying a statement made by the parties. I again ask if anybody wishes to put a question that they raise their hand. Can we therefore move on to the report of the independent investigator? And welcome.
Can you hear me there?
We can, Ms. Lingard.
Oh, good. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present my report. As I said when I addressed the meeting back in June, I don't think there's any great merit in me going through the entire report because I'm sure you've all read it. The nub of my considerations is really in section 7, and I'll just highlight some of those points. On the face of it, there doesn't appear to be anything desperately sensitive or confidential contained in the four phrases identified by Councillor Vickers as the confidential elements listed in paragraph 311, taken in isolation, but applying the principle set out in paragraph 5.8 above, which is about the use of confidential information, it's clear that what Councillor Vickers said in his email, there we are. It's clear that what Councillor Vickers said in his email to, as he thought, his political colleagues, wasn't intended to be seen or acted upon by anybody else, least of all his political opponents. Now, you'll remember that when Councillor McKinnon received Councillor Vickers' email for the first time, he did what Councillor Vickers himself described as a decent thing and deleted it. But when the second one came along, he didn't delete it, but he left it in his inbox because, and I quote what Councillor McKinnon said, it gave the Conservatives a very good insight into the internal thinking of the Lib Dems. Now, Councillor McKinnon clearly realised there was the potential to make political capital out of its disclosure because, in his words, the information became a lot more significant. Now, his point of personal explanation, which he set out at the EGM on the 19th of December last year, I think that was disingenuous. I'm not aware that anybody had accused him of actually telling lies. Rather, they criticised him for, in effect, failing to do the decent thing a second time. Now, it goes without saying that this matter will have brought home to Councillor Vickers and indeed others the importance of making sure that your address box is adequately filled before you press send. But the fact that the message was sent a second time didn't, in my view, amount to the giving of consent for its contents to be broadcast. The fact that the second transmission was like the first, inadvertent, makes no difference. Councillor McKinnon knew very well that the contents of the email weren't intended for him, not least because he said as much. And I'm not at all convinced by his argument that the contents of the email, that the disclosure of the contents of the email was in the public interest. It may well be argued that it was in the political interest of the Conservative Party, but that's not the same thing at all. It's stretching a point beyond what in my report at paragraph 7.8, it says beyond relational explanation, that should be rational, beyond rational explanation for Councillor McKinnon to argue that there was a genuine nexus between what Councillor Vickers had said in his email and any real danger to the environment. Now, I sent the draft report with my draft conclusion to Councillor Vickers and Councillor McKinnon on the 13th of May and asked them to let me have any comments within 10 working days. Councillor McKinnon made no comments on the draft report, and the comments that Councillor Vickers made didn't really relate directly to the question of breach, but more to the background to the debate which gave rise to the email being sent in the first place. So I wasn't persuaded to change my draft view that Councillor McKinnon did breach the WBC Code of Conduct because he disclosed confidential information. And that, Chairman, is it in a nutshell. Unless I can help you further, I'm not sure I can say anything more.
Thank you, Mr. Lingard. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Bay.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lingard. It's clear from events since you wrote your final report that the information contained that we're talking about now would have been in the public interest, given the change of national government and the imposition of a huge increase in housing quota. That information would have shown that there was a lack of consistency, a lack of agreement in the administration as to how the administration should move forward with the emerging local plan. What would you say to that?
Well, as I think I probably said in the report somewhere, I am not the final arbiter in this case. My view was formed on the basis of the information which I gleaned during the course of the investigation. if the situation has changed and that the change in the situation and in the political landscape leads the members of your committee to come to a different view because of the change of information, that is entirely your prerogative. There is no obligation whatsoever to agree with what I have said. And if you don't consider that Councillor McKinnon did breach the confidential requirement because it was in the public interest, then that is a decision for you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask you about this word confidential? Are we saying that confidential means something that should not have been seen by the people it wasn't sent to? Is that a definition of confidential? Because I'm struggling between confidential and embarrassing. I mean, I've sent emails to the wrong address with embarrassing consequences. That clearly happened here. The question is, because Councillor Vickers intended it to go to other members of his new executive. I mean, on what basis are you defining confidential, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Well, if you look at section 5 of my report, I go into this in some detail, and as I said in paragraph 5.9, most dictionary definitions of the word include the word itself as part of the definition, which is not really terribly helpful. But the principle is that information confided, and this information was confided by Councillor Vickers, should not be used or disclosed further except as originally understood by the confider. So it should only have been used or taken advantage of or by those to whom it was originally addressed. And if anybody else coming into possession of that information should not take advantage of it. There's a case on that, Lord Denning, in the case called Seeger and Copydex, and I quote that at paragraph 5.8.
Councillor Bay.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Lingard, take your point about confiding, but would you agree that persistent sharing of information in the way that Councillor Vickers did kind of neutralised the concept of confidentiality?
When you say persistent, you mean he did it again inadvertently?
He did it again, yes.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that was persistent. I thought that was another mistake on his part. And as I said again, paragraph 7.5, I don't think the fact that the second transmission was like the first inadvertent makes any difference.
I find it also being earnest.
We'll come to you in a second, Councillor Vickers. Any other from members? Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to make any questions of the written report, but I do have a question of referring to what Mr. Lingard has said. You may have given the impression, Mr. Lingard, that I wasn't looking at the to line in my inbox or in the individual message. But wouldn't you agree that the error was not mine, but that of the system, which failed to reconstruct the address line that said all members executive, and that I'd been told that that had been fixed. But in my ignorance as to how the IT systems work, I had persisted in using the same address line, not realizing that it didn't change that thread of emails. I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I accept that point. You believed that the change had been made, but in fact it hadn't. But what I wasn't quite clear about was whether about the timing of your realization that it hadn't been updated. What sort of time elapsed between the initial transmission, then how much time before you realized that the address box was wrong, and the second transmission?
Just to be clear on that, I think it was actually Councillor McKinnon that eventually explained to me how the system works, but that was some weeks, if not months later. But, you know, we don't become councillors with a ready-made expertise in how IT systems work. So I think it's a system failure rather than my personal failure, if you wouldn't mind me saying. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I suppose there's an element of once bitten, twice shy. As it went wrong once, maybe it was worth a double check next time round. But I mean, you're not under investigation here, so I wasn't going to pass any judgment on that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor McKinnon, any questions?
Yeah, I do actually. Thanks, Chairman, and thanks to Councillor Vickers as well for his comments there. I did feel for Councillor Vickers when that happened. As Councillor Marsh says, you know, it's quite easy to do, make a mistake in that respect. I have a few questions. Mr. Lingard, the word confiding to me seems to imply a bit of an intention. So, for example, if Councillor Vickers had said to me, Ross, I want to talk to you about something, it's confidential, and I'd really appreciate you to keep it to yourself, and he confided that information to me, I think we'd be dealing with a very different situation. Sort of accidental disclosure, I don't think implies confiding, really. So I guess we could argue over the definitions of words, but I just wondered what you thought about that argument.
Well, in another instance, there was another case completely nothing to do with this one. There was a suggestion that if person A told person B that what he had just told him was confidential, but didn't tell him until after he'd disclosed the information, that it didn't count. Well, I don't buy that at all. And in this particular instance, it's clear that you regarded you regarded the information as confidential, because as you said. You said I can't remember exactly what words. I think you said something along the lines of, "I presume this wasn't meant to come to us." Yeah. So I think you accepted that it was not intended for you, and therefore was or should have been confidential.
Through you, Chairman, I'm not sure that those two things are the same thing. It certainly wasn't intended to come to me. That's absolutely right. I deleted the email not because I considered it to be confidential. And it's like there is a definition of confidential information in the glossary to the Constitution, the Council Constitution, which I'm looking at here. And it's information given to the Council by a government department on terms which forbid its public disclosure of information which cannot be publicly disclosed by court order. That's a very narrow definition of confidential information. I think you said earlier on that there wasn't actually a definition of confidential information in the Constitution, but it is there, Mr. Lingard.
Well, if it's there, it's there. I mean, I was looking at the statutory provisions and common law definitions as well, and I think the fact that most dictionary definitions include the word itself is indicative of the fact that it's actually self-evident what it means. It's confidential. It is being disclosed by person A to person B, or so he thought, and person C in receipt of it should realise that it was intended for person B and should not disclose it further.
And one more, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Lingard made the point that my disclosure was to further the interests of the Conservative Party politically, not to further the public interest. I would ask, aren't there some situations where those two things may coincide? And furthering the political interests of the Conservatives is at the same time in the public interest, because the public have a right to know that in this case, our political opponents are perhaps behaving in a way that we want them to know, which doesn't reflect well on them. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but simply because the disclosure might help my side and disadvantage the Lib Dem side does not of itself mean that the disclosure wasn't in the public interest. Would that not be fair?
It's a point of view, but your emphasis certainly seemed to be, where is it? It gave the Conservatives a very good insight into the internal thinking of the Lib Dems, and I mean, I don't know whether you would agree with what I've said there, that you realised there was the potential to make political capital because the information became a lot more significant.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers, it's your opportunity to make an oral submission now.
I have no need to make an oral submission, but I would like my witness, Councillor Bricks, to say something at this point, if that's allowed.
I did take advice in ahead because I anticipated this, and yes, it is.
I'm grateful to you.
It is a question to Mr. Lingard, as much as a statement. Mr. Lingard, I contend, and I'll get to the question in a moment, the system let the councillors down here. Completely let the councillors down. Were you aware that the IT department here had not updated that general group email address? And therefore, Councillor McKinnon was a legacy member of that group from the time the previous administration was in power. And it is a source of great anger to me, frankly, that our processes here in IT, having onboarded and offboarded executive members for decades, did not have a process to update that when the executive changed in May last year. And Councillor Vickers fell into that trap. He was then given some assurance that the exec group had been updated, and guess what? He fell into that trap again. Now, whether that's germane to this case, it still needs to go on record that, frankly, the system let the councillors down. Were you aware of that? The complexity of that, or the nuance of that within this case, sir?
I'm not going to comment on the adequacy or otherwise of the IT department, but yes, I was aware of the reason why Councillor Vickers' email went to the wrong people. Yes.
I'm glad that's been aired, Chairman, and thank you, because
I hope I've made that clear, but yeah.
The inference is that Councillor Vickers just was rather slapdash. And I felt I wanted to come to his, his support there, because I'm not even sure to this day whether a process has been implemented and whether this could happen again.
If I may comment, Chairman, no, I don't suggest that Councillor Vickers was slapdash. He was a victim of an unfortunate set of circumstances. But as I say, he is not under investigation. It's not his fault that the information slipped out, as it were. But the investigation is into a complaint against Councillor McKinnon, who, in my view, made inappropriate use of it.
Councillor Vickers, do you have anything else to add? No other witnesses, I assume. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chairman. Am I able to question the witness?
Yep.
Chairman, thank you. Councillor Brooks, are you aware that the situation that Councillor Vickers faced was the situation that all 43 of us members faced? And that some of us, probably most of us, took great care when we were sending emails to the distribution list through the simple act of clicking on the plus sign next to it. And I did that time and again to make sure that when I was sending emails to all shadow executive members, I wasn't sending it to the preceding shadow executive members. Were you aware of that?
Well, Councillor Burke, your diligence in that is perhaps to be applauded.
Thank you.
However, I don't expect 43 members of this council to have to second guess who they're sending emails to. I expect the system to update it. And I'd come back at you in the point of view of saying, Mr. Lingard has said, Mr. Vickers is not under investigation here. This is about confidentiality. I wanted it on record that, frankly, I think the system let the members down.
Any other questions? In that case, Councillor sorry. Councillor Jeffrey.
Forgive me, Chairman. Is this still questions to Dr. Lingard?
No, this is questions to Councillor Brooks.
Questions to Councillor Brooks.
Councillor McKinnon, your chance to make an oral submission if you wish.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, much of what Mr. Lingard says I wouldn't dispute, although I would dispute his conclusions in some regards, which I'll explain now. Firstly, when Councillor Vickers sent me sent me and others the information in error in the first place, I deleted it because I felt for it. I thought, well, they've only just been elected. We'll do him a favour here and delete that because it was very politically useful. When he sent it a second time, I didn't delete it, but I didn't do anything with it. In fact, I didn't do anything. I was not planning on doing anything with it until again, not getting into party politics, but certainly in our view, the administration started to pursue a policy which appeared to be at odds with the view of Councillor Vickers. And instantly I thought that isn't the public interest to know, because hypothetically, if you have an administration who's pursuing a policy in public, which at least one of its members thinks is not good for the district, then the public have a right to know that. The fact that that disclosure may be embarrassing for the other side and therefore advantageous to my side is undeniable. But that fact does not necessarily negate any public interest in the disclosure. And I think that's an important point to put out there. It didn't contain any personal information. It didn't contain information about businesses or anything private in that respect. And in fact, the distribution list of the email, it was to the entire executive team and senior officers. You know, this was not a heavily restricted top secret bit of information. So I would say that there certainly is a public interest angle in the disclosure, while accepting the fact that it benefited us and it would disadvantage the Lib Dems. That's fine. There is a definition of confidential information in the glossary to the Constitution. It is very narrow, and I don't think you could consider the information I disclosed to meet that. So we are in a situation there where people are needing to define these things themselves. And you know, Councillor Brooks there is talking about the system being failed. It would be good for these things to be clearer as to what is considered confidential or exempt. But I think the other points have been made already, so I'll conclude my remarks there.
Okay. You're not bringing any witnesses, I assume? Any questions from the committee? After you.
Thank you. So as Councillor Bart pointed out, were you also aware that there was a fault in the system that distributed emails to other than the current executive?
Yes, when I received the email from Councillor Vickers in the first instance, I could see exactly what had happened. And I informed Councillor Vickers of that.
Thank you.
No others? Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor McKinnon, can you take us again through your precise logic that the first time that you saw this document, you deleted it and allowed Councillor Vickers to know that this had happened, but the second time you retained it and did not comment on the fact that you had received it a second time?
The first time I received the information, I felt for Councillor Vickers on a personal level because it was embarrassing and clearly not intended. So I did him a favour. I told him and I deleted it. The second time I received it, well, I've given you a pass once. I didn't do anything with it. I didn't disclose it at that point, but I didn't say anything. But I didn't actively do anything else.
Councillor Marsh.
I was going to ask the same question, Chair.
Any other questions? Any clarification required on any of the presentations made?
Chair, is the witness or Councillor Vickers allowed to ask Councillor McKinnon a question?
No?
No, proceed with that one.
Oh, sorry. Any clarification required from anybody else? In that case, we will normally adjourn. We will move straight on to the other item and then do the two together. Councillor Berwick requested I think, for the press and public to be removed from this one.
Yes, I would want just to raise the point that much of the content of the material was not in the public domain. And I think that making this public, making this meeting public, betrays that confidentiality, if you like, and privacy in which those exchanges took place.
Yes, please.
So just to clarify, sorry.
That's right.
To Chair, sorry, just a point of clarification. Aren't these documents actually made available to the public anyway, in which case it's already in the public domain by someone logging in, because it says right at the top, I think, scan here to access public documents for the meeting. So it'd be interesting to know what documents are actually available to the public or not.
So these documents have been published 5 days ahead of today's meeting. So they were published last Thursday. There are grounds in which the public can be excluded from a meeting. And it is one of the grounds is that it is likely, in the view of the nature of the business to be transacted or discussed, that members of the public were present during that item. Confidential information would be disclosed to them in breach of the obligation of confidence. And we can pass a resolution that this be held in private and that members of the public be excluded from today's hearing, but that will be a matter of vote for the committee.
Can we go?
I'm not sure that answers my question. So are these documents actually available to the public? I don't know when they're actually published and when they can download them, because it says scan here to access the public documents for this meeting. Does that mean the whole document is already available to the public or not?
My interpretation of what the modules were saying is that there could be other items that come out as a result of this, which have not been included in the papers. Is that correct?
But the point of clarification is the papers that are before the committee today are within the public domain and they were published Thursday of last week.
So everything which we should be discussing, should be in these documents, is already in the public domain. So I can't see why there would be anything else coming up that wasn't already in the public domain. I'm a little bit confused here.
I mean, my advice has been that the information is within the public domain and therefore there is no reason to exclude the members of the public. But I think given the comments made by Councillor Burke, it's probably sensible for the committee to take a vote on that.
So can anybody raise hands if they wish to exclude members of the public? One. No.
I was just asking for clarification.
Okay. We won't exclude members of the public then. Right, I think we go back to Mr. Lingard on the second item.
Thank you, Chairman. As per the previous item, sound like a cracked record, I know, but I don't intend to go through the report in any detail, but focus on considerations. And the nub of this whole case is whether or not Councillor McKinnon was bound by the code of conduct at the time he said the things that he said and doesn't dispute saying. Now, Councillor McKinnon set out an interpretation of the wording of the code, and I set out his response in paragraph 7.1 of my report. And I don't dispute the logic of his strict interpretation of the wording of the code, but, and this is a big but, I believe it's necessary to look beyond the letter of the law to the surrounding circumstances. And the most significant of those circumstances are, in my view, that he was, at the time he made these posts and comments, a high-profile serving councillor, known to be such, and was proposing to stand for re-election. His remark was made about another serving councillor who was serving at that time, who was also hoping to be re-elected to WBC, and it was addressed to, amongst other people, other prospective candidates who might reasonably have supposed that the sort of conduct that Councillor McKinnon was exhibiting was acceptable behaviour on the part of a senior elected representative. Now, I don't think the fact that the posts were, or were rather intended to be, private can of itself simply absolve Councillor McKinnon of his obligations as to conduct, particularly as the abusive comment was directed at another councillor. And the fact that membership of that WhatsApp group included a WBC employee lends strength to my belief that there were links to WBC, thus bringing the code into play. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that the sort of language to which Councillor McKinnon and others involved resorted was, well, I've said in my report, disgraceful, unprofessional and unbecoming of anyone in public life. And further, if I may be allowed this comment, Chairman, this matter should never have got to the stage of a formal investigation. It could have been resolved months ago by an apology, but unfortunately, none was forthcoming. That's all I've got to say, Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions of the committee?
Well, if I may, my apologies to you, Chairman, and to the committee. These are questions to Mr. Lingard, yes? and
Yes, exactly.
My apologies.
Any other questions of Mr. Lingard? Councillor Burke.
Mr. Lingard, I'm hoping at the end of this meeting to repair to the pub with a couple of Conservative friends of mine. Will the conversation that I have with my friends be bound by the code of conduct for councillors?
Probably not.
In what way then is that setting logically different from the WhatsApp group we're discussing?
The WhatsApp group that's under discussion was a group, as I understand it, of councillors, aspiring councillors. It was a political meeting, people talking about how to get elected and all the rest of it. And there were some people there, including Councillor McKinnon, who, and well, let's leave other people out of it. Councillor McKinnon, as I said there, he was at the time he made these posts a high-profile serving councillor, and I think it is quite legitimate to associate that with being bound by the code. You're quite right. A conversation in the pub between a couple of chums is neither here nor there. This went beyond that, in my view. And again, it's a view with which you and your colleagues are quite entitled to disagree. But my firm view is that although I don't dispute what Councillor McKinnon set out by way of interpretation of the wording of the code, I think that you need to look beyond that, which is what I've done.
I'm really struggling to find an answer to my question there. In what way is the informal setting of 2 or 3 people or more having a conversation privately different from people having a conversation in a WhatsApp group? What's the logical difference?
I think I've done my best to answer that question. It was the purpose of the WhatsApp group and the membership that in my view brought this within the code.
Right. I think unless there's any other questions of the committee, we can ask Councillor McKinnon if he wishes to make an oral submission.
No, thank you very much, Chairman. Yes.
I'm sorry.
No,
Okay. Sorry, my mistake. Far away, Councillor Cotton.
Thank you. So is there a difference in basically between verbal sparring and written documentation of comments and that it may be available to those outside that general party? Is that part of your thoughts on this issue?
I don't think it makes any difference whether it's verbal or written. I mean, it's you can. And there's a difference between libel and slander. One is written. One is excuse me. One is oral. It's defamation. It's the same thing.
So, is it the concern? Is there a concern that it's availability to other people's outside that group?
It's the concern was not expressed, was it, by the by people outside the group? People within the group were concerned about it, and that I think is very telling.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Any question from Mr. Masters? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Lingard said, and it made an interesting point there when he said that there were concerns expressed by people within the group as to the nature of some discussions. What evidence does Mr. Lingard have to make that statement?
I had, as the report states, I interviewed a couple of people who wished to remain anonymous, and they were quite clear about the concern which led to the police becoming involved, particularly over the use of the phrase "choosing violence."
Thank you. And did I get it right that you believe that evidence coming from anonymous sources is of little value?
Anonymous evidence is of less probative value. There's no doubt about that. But the background to this case and the consistency of what I was told led me to believe that there was genuine concern amongst certain members of the group about the way in which Councillor McKinnon had been, the phraseology of his posts, and it seemed to me fairly plain that there was a genuine concern here, which some people felt warranted the involvement of the police.
Marsh?
So are we, just to clarify, are we saying that it was somebody in the group who's made these quotes from it and the evidence from it public?
Well, the complaint was made by former Councillor Masters, as you know. I'm just trying to find the relevant bit in my report about the disclosure to the police, because I think Mr. Masters can correct me if I'm wrong about who actually went to the police. All right.
Well, there's no suggestion, but there's no suggestion that anyone somehow hacked into this. So one assumes, therefore, I'm just trying to clarify, that somebody in the group, you've just been talking about people who had concerns, and it was it basically?
No, no, I'm not aware of anybody having hacked in. It was people within the group who were concerned. Yes, in fact, paragraph 3.9. That's what I've been looking for. It was a member of the Conservative group who took the screenshots of the WhatsApp exchanges and actually went to the police before telling Steve Masters about it. It was only with greatest reluctance that the person who took the screenshots handed copies over to Mr. Masters.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. And my other question, we've been talking about or hearing about whether this is just a sort of like a conversation among colleagues or friends, as might happen in a pub or anywhere else. Does the fact that a council employee who's a political advisor to the Conservative group at the time, may still be, I'm not sure, who was taking part in, does that affect that at all? Does that make it, as it were, kind of official that there was a council employee participating in this?
Well, as I said in paragraph 13.6, I said the fact that membership of the group included a WBC employee, well, the way I've phrased it is, lends credence to my belief that there were links to the WBC. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any question from you, Mr. Masters? To Mr. Lingard?
No questions, no.
Councillor McKinnon, any questions to Mr. Lingard?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I think Mr. Lingard has, I think he said himself, he's looking beyond the words that are in the code rather than the actual words of the code. Now, he's entitled to his view, but Appendix 1 of the code clearly defines when a councillor is acting in their capacity. And there's 3 examples given. Acting as a representative of the council, participating in a meeting, or corresponding with the authority other than they're in their private capacity. I wasn't participating in a meeting. I wasn't acting as a representative of the council. I was in that group as a candidate. And I wasn't corresponding with the authority. So I guess my question is, which of those 3 definitions, Mr. Lingard, do you consider puts me in the position of acting in my capacity.
Well, as I said before, I don't disagree with your strict interpretation, but there is such a concept as equity beyond law, and it's that concept which I think justifies looking beyond the strict letter of the law. I mean, you and I exchanged. Well, you submitted a number of comments in response to the draft report, and they are set out in paragraph 15 of my report, and my response to each of them is set out there. And I don't think I've got anything to add to that. As I say, I don't disagree with your strict interpretation. I think in this case, the strict interpretation doesn't go far enough.
To put that in other words then, Mr. Lingard, the code says what it says, but you'd like to say something else. Would that be fair?
No.
I do have one more question, Chairman, if you don't mind. And during our conversation, Mr. Lingard, we focused entirely about the rather unkind description I'd used about Mr. Masters.
Yeah.
Not about the phrase choosing violence, which again, I'm sure I'll come on to later. And I was somewhat shocked when I saw your report to find an awful lot there covering that phrase, but you hadn't asked me about that phrase at all in our meeting, or give me an opportunity to put my side of the story there. Can I ask why that was?
Well, you made this point in your response to the draft, and if you look at paragraph 15.4 on page 15 of the report, which is 19 of your agenda, comment 2, you say, at no point in our conversation did you ask me about choosing violence. Our conversation solely concerned poisonous little toad. You have therefore reached conclusions without any input from me. And I've said, and I stand by this, ironically, it was because you'd submitted such a comprehensive response to the complaint for consideration by the panel that I didn't think it was necessary to canvass that any further with you in any detail, because you made your position quite clear about the meaning of choosing violence, and the fact that I maintain reservations about the impact of such a phrase on those who are not in the know doesn't detract from my independence or, as I say, the validity of my view. So it's not correct to say that you had no input. You did have input. It was at an earlier stage, but it was very comprehensive.
Just to follow up on that, Chairman, if I may, that I'm glad that you found my submissions on that matter very, very clear. It's clear you take a rather opposite view to me on that one. I just find it odd that you didn't seek the opportunity in person to test my submissions. It just seems a bit strange to me, but that's fine. Thanks, Chairman.
We move on then to oral submission from Mr. Masters, if you wish to make one.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll keep this fairly brief because I think the report is fairly comprehensive, and I reserve my right to call Caroline Culver as a witness if required by the committee. The report I accept. It's quite interesting to hear that we've heard about the interest of public interest for in the previous complaint, but there's no public interest here. Moving to Councillor Bowick's question about a conversation in a pub, if Councillor Bowick was talking about violence in the round, joking or whatever, and somebody heard it, there would be a public interest. It's very much about context and content. And if he was having a drink with fellow Conservatives and there was an officer who's a support officer present, again, that would add another context and element to whether or not it was in the public interest in the pub conversation. So there's no real parallel there. So I hope that clarifies for the members. The poisonous little toad, I think, is almost secondary. I've been called far worse. I call myself far worse when I'm joking. It's the context of violence in the political round. Nobody vetted candidates to a certain extent. Nobody knows exactly what the background of people are when they're standing. You know, there was exchanges in there, joking, it may have been, but some people are easily radicalized. We don't know these, you know, people are, you know, somebody could have gone out there and you know, and I'm not particularly concerned that Councillor McKinnon is going to confront me in a dark alley, you know. There wasn't the context there of that threat, but people joking about violence was so anathema to people in that chat group that they went to the police. And then the police made me aware of it some days later. So that's where it is. You know, where do we draw the line? I think somebody said, oh, well, we're not allowed to have private chats. If that chat was talking about assassinating the king or something, you know, that's not a private conversation that's not in the public interest. You know, WhatsApp chats were leaked in the public interest because of realistic concerns of an individual in that group. And that's all I've got to say.
Questions from the committee? Anything else you wish to add?
No, thank you, Chairman.
Do you wish to call a witness?
Not at this time, no.
I'm not sure you get another opportunity. You don't get another opportunity. So, Councillor McKinnon, your opportunity to do an oral submission.
I'd like to call the witness.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't detain members too long with the points I want to make. I think there's 4 points, very, very briefly. It's worth bearing in mind it was Conservative councillors at that time who went to the police. It wasn't Greens, so it wasn't political point scoring. It was members of the own group. As has been mentioned, Jake Carpenter, the political officer for the Conservative group, was in that chat. We should remind ourselves that the COVID inquiry thinks that WhatsApp messages between politicians are relevant to the inquiry. They don't consider them not relevant because they're on WhatsApp. The fact that there was a council officer in there, to my mind, does make it relevant and does make it of interest to the public. I think it's worth mentioning for the benefit of people, members of the public and members may not have read it in great detail. As has been mentioned, it could radicalise people. We don't know who else is on that chat. Someone on the chat who is not a councillor and has never been a councillor but was in there says, new to the group, so I need to be more violent, do I? With a laughing emoji. Now, how can we be confident that that person is not capable of being radicalised? And then somebody else says, we don't all choose violence here, but if you ever need backup, we've got a few characters ready to go, my husband for one. And the person who made that comment was the wife of Councillor McKinnon, and my husband for one is a reference to him. So I think these comments are of great concern. As a councillor, I don't have a great deal of confidence in our code of conduct or in the LGA civility in public life and debate not hate. I think all of those are pretty tokenistic if we do not take things like this very seriously. 2 members of parliament in the past have been stabbed to death, and I do not think that it is acceptable in any context for politicians to be talking about violence. And I will leave my comments there. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions of the committee? Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Culver. Are you aware, Councillor Culver, that the Conservative Party and local associations undergo extremely rigorous selection processes to identify people who we think are reliable? Sorry, I'm sorry, Councillor Masters, I'm asking Councillor Culver a question. People that are trustworthy and reliable. Are you aware of the detail of our selection process?
I'm not a member of the Conservative Party, so I'm not aware of your So, but what I would say is if you do go through a rigorous process, why is it that existing councillors, including the then leader and candidates, are talking about violence? Is there nothing in your approvals process that talks to your candidates and councillors about what's not acceptable? Why did the then leader of that group not say, hold on a minute, this is not an acceptable way to conduct yourselves?
You've gone beyond my question, so thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor McGinnon.
Thank you, Chairman, through you. We've heard a lot there about people joking about violence and talking about violence. That is not what these messages were about. Okay, so the phrase choosing violence are, I guess this is a question to Councillor Culver or Councillor Masters. Are you aware of the use of that phrase?
Can't ask a question.
A question through you, Chairman. I would say, are they aware of the?
I don't think you're allowed to, Councillor McGinnon. I'm sorry.
Why not? I'm sorry. I thought I was. Beg your pardon.
No, the subject member is not entitled to cross-examine the complainant.
I think I'm entitled to ask the chairman to put that question at his discretion. Is that the case?
So I was just clarifying that the subject member may request to the chairman of the meeting to direct appropriate questions to the witness.
Thank you. So may I ask, Chairman, if you could ask the witness, is she aware of the provenance of that phrase, particularly on social media?
Oh, let me just say it again, Councillor Culver.
I would ask the question of the members. Are you aware of what it means? If you read the word violence, what do you think it means? Do you think, oh, it's something on social media, or do you think it means violence?
Councillor Jeffries.
Mr. Chairman, I believe I've got to put this as a question, haven't I? I'm of a generation which is perhaps a little bit older than Councillor McKinnon's, and I can assure you that most people of my age, seeing the words choosing violence, will believe that it means choosing violence, not that it has some abstruse meaning within electronic media that is, I'm pushing back against your views or something like that. Choosing violence, and particularly in the context that the remarks being made about 5 times this evening that 2 members of parliament have died in service. I will actually remind you that before that, a third person.
Does Councillor Jeffrey have a question? It's
a
that
third,
he's
yes.
making a speech.
No, I'm asking the question as to whether or not Councillor McKinnon is aware of what an ordinary person of a certain age would understand by the meaning of various of these things. And I'm also adding in the fact that a Liberal Democrat MP was attacked by a man with a sword, and he did not die, but his assistant did. So I can assure you this goes back even further than the 2 MPs that have been killed in more recent days. Do you understand that choosing violence is a phrase that will be understood by many people to mean choosing violence?
I don't actually, Councillor Jeffrey. I mean, I'm just having a quick look on social media now. Carol Vorderman's chosen violence because she's having a go at Tories on the election night programme. The BBC cameraman woke up and chose violence with his slow zoom into Liz Truss on election night. Larry the Downing Street cat chooses violence. It is widely used, and people know that we are not talking about actual violence. It comes from the popular TV show Game of Thrones, is where it started, and that is the provenance of that phrase. I can tell you right now, there was no question of myself, my wife, the former leader, anyone condoning or appearing to condone violence. We were expressing ourselves in a certain way, but people have a right to express themselves in that way, particularly when they have a reasonable expectation of privacy in a WhatsApp group. So this whole idea about us talking about violence and joking about violence, it is not the case. The word was used, but you know, we always use words. We don't always mean their literal meaning. We've just heard Mr. Lingard talk about pragmatic interpretations and looking beyond the words. I think any reasonable person looking at those messages would know exactly that violence was not on the agenda or being condoned or anywhere near it.
Mr. Chairman, I dispute that because I am a reasonable person, and I can assure you that is not how I understand the words choosing violence. It is completely new to me since starting this particular agenda.
I think Councillor Jeffries said all to come up in the debate we have.
Chairman, may I just, in view of what Councillor McKinnon's just said about my view on pragmatism, could I just invite the committee to read paragraph 10.7 of my report when you consider this matter, because that encapsulates my view, which I think corrects what Councillor McKinnon may think my view is. Paragraph 10.7. I won't go through it now, but if you could perhaps flag that up and then look at it when you're debating. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Lingard.
So are we currently questioning Councillor McKinnon?
I think we're actually waiting for Councillor McKinnon's oral statement. Unless you use it.
Mr. Lingard.
Because I do have one or two questions for him, including about this choose violence business.
You will get that opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
The parish councillor is indicating he wants to ask a question.
Yep.
Southgate.
Mr. Southgate, welcome.
Good evening. Sorry, I've been.
Who you intend to or wish to ask the question to?
I think for the green individuals, initially with a view of understanding the Newbury Weekly News ran a fairly detailed article on this in March of this year. Was that sourced from the Green Party, or was that from some other means? The reason I just raised the question is that if the concern was over individuals acting in association with such words, this has gone from a limited WhatsApp discussion to the general public of West Berkshire and beyond. Consequently, if there is a concern about individuals who are not vetted or take things literally as to what they read, then this clearly has a much wider connotation associated with the use of violence, purely because of the audience it then goes to, and trying to understand where that article came from, given that then essentially makes those words very public and very directed against individuals.
I suggest that's also part of the debate we have subsequently.
Okay, it's.
Chairman, I can answer that.
Who was that? Mr. Masters.
The article was a result of a statement that the Green Party leader at the time put out in response to our interactions with the police and the disclosure of the discussion involving violence, etc. They picked up on that statement.
Thank you for that helpful comment. Can I go back to then Councillor McKinnon?
Thanks, Chairman. So is this my oral submission?
It is.
Okay.
Finally.
I think there's really two key issues here. Firstly, was I acting in my capacity as a councillor? And I think that has been examined already at length. I think some very good questions were put earlier on, both to myself and Mr. Lingard about that. So clearly it's my view that I was not in a private WhatsApp chat, not at a meeting of the council. I've gone through the definition. The definition is there. And these codes of conduct, members, all of us actually deserve clarity about what that code of conduct is. And when the words, I think they're very clear, the words in the code of conduct there, when the words say something, it's not very helpful for others or for when people are interpreting the code to say, oh, well, let's look beyond that. Let's see what it really means. Let's see what it should mean. I don't think that's helpful to any of us. The code is there, and I think it's important to stick to the definition. The second point is, if you do consider I was acting in my capacity as councillor, were the words used appropriate? I've heard other descriptions used about disgraceful and childish, and I think those are very emotive, rather inappropriately so, in fact. I have said my piece on choosing violence, and I cannot be clearer about what that means and does not mean. So I re-emphasise that point right now. And the people in the group were not joking about violence. They were entering into communication on the understanding that I've just described. None of this, I think, was ever intended to be made public. Councillor Masters, I think, fairly says that he's been called worse and he's called himself worse. And, you know, I would say to him and everyone that describing someone in an unkind manner like that is not something I would do in public. That clearly is inappropriate for councillors. But as I said, on a private chat with a reasonable expectation of privacy, I think we sometimes choose to express ourselves in ways that, when they do become public, are rather embarrassing, and that's certainly the case. But no, councillors shouldn't be describing each other like that in public, but this was not in public. So I think that's the two key things for the committee to consider. I think the first one is the capacity issue, and then the second is really around the meaning of the words. And I think there is some case law on this. And Ms. Thomas, you might want to just give me an indication if I end up stepping out of line here, because a recent complaint was made. I'm not going to give you the names of the people, but it was against a West Berkshire councillor, a serving West Berkshire councillor, by a former one, regarding use of a phrase that had been made by that councillor to the other. And I can tell you there was some swearing in that phrase, and it's perhaps a good deal stronger than what I'm up before the committee here about today. And it was held then that there is a protection of free speech issue. Okay, it's in Article 10 of ECHR, and members have an extended protection about free speech. Ms. Thomas, am I still on solid ground here?
Providing you don't refer to any details of the case.
That's lovely. So that, I can say that the complaint was, well, it didn't make it this far, put it that way. And what was uttered was perhaps a damn sight stronger than for what I've been uttered. So even if you do consider there's a capacity issue, there is a way that people express themselves. I take on Councillor Jeffrey's point that maybe not everyone out there would know what was meant by that. But I'm explaining it to you now, and a quick look online will back up what I'm saying. People are entitled to express themselves in a way that they see fit. And as I said, those are not statements I would have ever made in public. But in private, with friends and colleagues, I think things are slightly different. So there is a freedom of speech angle to this as well. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, but happy to take questions.
Any questions? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. I know we talked a bit about this, but just to ask you a little bit more about this choose violence. I know what choose violence in Game of Thrones means. Okay, I've looked it up. I take your point. Do you think that everyone in the group, I mean, I don't know whether the people in the Conservative candidates group were all Game of Thrones fans and got this, but do you think they got it? Because, for example, the person who said, I need to be more violent, that doesn't sound like they get what choose violence that you're saying it means. And then secondly, do you think, for a start, we've got somebody who leaked this because presumably they weren't happy with, maybe they didn't get so secondly, do the wider public understand it? Because an awful lot of comments were made under the story in the local paper and elsewhere online about violence, and nobody seemed to get the choose violence thing. And then thirdly, in view of that, would you say now it's regrettable that the phrase was used because so many people apparently don't get it and therefore might think it does mean real violence, even though you're, saying that you were using it in a metaphorical way? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Hopefully I won't miss any of those, but it's a good point you raise about the phrase, did everyone get it? I think when you're in a WhatsApp group like that, you've got an awful lot of members in that group. Many of them don't partake. The fact that the point you made there about the person saying, oh, I need to be more violent, do I? And that's joking. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't get it. But I know that lady, and she's the least violent person you'll ever have. She was entering into the spirit, perhaps, of the conversation. In terms of what was your second question? Sorry, Councillor Marshall, just lost
whether the wider public would accept the assurance that this didn't refer to violence, bearing in mind the comments that were made in the press and on social media suggested they thought you were talking about violence, not quoting some a meme from Game of Thrones.
I think that the use of the phrase from it started on Game of Thrones, but it's widely used online. So a moderate social media user, you would tend to expect to have come across the phrase, perhaps. Your point is actually a good one in terms of this. Is it regrettable? Does everyone get the reference? Probably not. And in hindsight, are those words that I would use again, given the furore that's come up? Again, probably not. I don't think there's. You always live and learn a little bit, but I cannot emphasize enough that we were not joking about violence. And in terms of the person within the group who leaked it, I know that person, and I would say that just because somebody has concerns or goes to we've heard a lot about police involvement. The police didn't get involved, and police didn't want to know. But the fact that a report was made makes this sound worse than it was. Not everyone acts with reasonableness, Councillor Marsh, and I don't consider those concerns to be reasonable given the context. Has that answered all of those points?
Chairman, am I allowed to make a point of information, please?
Sorry, Councillor Campbell, no.
Okay.
Am I allowed to make a point of information, Chairman?
You can ask for a point of clarification.
Point of clarification.
Yep.
Despite Councillor McKinnon's assertion that the police were not involved, there was extensive conversations with myself and the area commander, and also a number of other councillors, including the one who'd reported it to him. And there was lots of interactions, and those interactions continued to the point where it was clear that some pressure had been put on political sources to have statements retracted. And he had told us that he'd spoken to the leader. He spoke to former Councillor Doherty on this matter.
Councillor Bowe.
Chairman, there's absolutely no evidence being presented as to the claims that Councillor Masters has made. I think we should discount them. I think committees should be invited to ignore those comments. Political pressure. Ex-Councillor Doxey is not here to defend herself.
Right. Okay. I do not think it is relevant, to be honest, mainly because I'm very much aware that it was dismissed very quickly by the police. So it is probably an irrelevance. Right. Do you wish to bring any? Councillor?
We're still taking questions for Councillor.
Yep.
Chair, I was just like a little bit further on the point 14.1 made by Mr. Lingard's report. I was just wondering if Councillor McKinnon could just clarify why he thought it was appropriate or expedient not to make an appropriately worded apology to Mr. Masters.
I think, Councillor Reid, given that we're now at this stage, then that would clearly have been a more palatable way to proceed at that point, and I regret that.
Thank you.
I take you have no witnesses you wish to call? Sorry? No?
No witnesses, no. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any further questions on the committee? Anyone require? Oh, sorry.
So I've not been to one of these formalities before, but it's an observation, and just picking up on what Mr. McKinnon's just said, which was you were asked about the apology would it have been appropriate to have given an apology right at the very beginning?
We are where we are, Councillor Lewis. I think we all sometimes wish we'd done things differently in hindsight. That may well have been appropriate. I think the reason why I was perhaps reluctant to do so, and it was basically the second time I've asked the question, but I'll have another bite at it, is that I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. I know what was in my mind when I made those comments. I know what was in my heart when I was making those comments. And when the complaint was made in the terms that it was made, I felt quite aggrieved by that. It was quite hurtful to have your privacy breached, those private messages, which is somewhat ironic given that Councillor Vickers earlier on, but, I've seen both sides of the coin on this. And it's really important to say that, these are not words that I would tend to use about most people. There's a long history there of, I think, a lot of provocation. And I know that, Mr. Masters isn't under investigation here, but there is a context that the public have not heard, and there's a context that the committee are not hearing tonight, which perhaps hardened my resolve against that. But would it have been better? It may well have done.
So my observation is, and my concern is that however many months down the line we are, and we are in a time when we don't have sufficient finances, what has been the cost of all of this? Just when an apology could have ended it, but I'm glad it hasn't in some ways, because we're seeing a bigger picture, especially around the use of the word violence. But there's two sides to this. Did we want to save some money, perhaps? Would an apology have been better? Or where we're at now and learning a bit more of the story? I know that in the past I've made comments on social media and I've been held up against the code of conduct, and I've said something in what I consider to be an appropriate context, but I chose to say sorry.
Well, it's not for me to speculate on the costs of proceedings and the cost of the independent investigator. I mean, these processes exist for a reason, and it's quite proper that the proceedings have gone the way they have. I don't think they should have got to this stage because I disagree with the independent person's report, obviously. So I think to put all of the price tag and the blame for these proceedings getting here on myself, I think would be a touch harsh.
Just to clarify, not putting it entirely on yourself, but it's just interesting what happens in with hindsight. Would we have got this far if you had said sorry?
Just a sec. Mr. Miles, I'm afraid that we're not allowed to speak now. Councillor Drummond?
Yeah, following on from Councillor Lewis's questions, could you tell me if you took any legal advice or any advice from your party in the decision you made?
Yes, I can tell you, and no, I did not.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Reid? No?
Can I just respond to Councillor Lewis's point, just for perhaps it might help our understanding? I know from harsh experience.
Excuse me, is it a question or not? Because if not, we should be in the next stage.
Okay.
Yes. In that case, I think we adjourn the meeting. So can I ask all people that are not members of this committee to? Sorry? Yeah, including the complaint. Yep. Yep. Yep, with pleasure.
Just in the chat.
Just to advise, we're once again live.
The other phrase on both counts, but yeah. Yeah. We haven't asked them to decide what the sanction might be yet.
No, you then adjourn to consider sanctions. We might.
Okay. Officers gone, so all that's left, Steve Master, Karen Corbin, Tony Lynn, and left. They obviously come back in, so back in. But they can't look after the plans, so they can hear it said. Yeah. Then we just close it down again for we'll have sanctions. Okay, are we gone public again on there? Yeah. Yeah. We've had a long debate, as you probably gathered. And the conclusion is that the view of the independent expert is upheld. Councillor McKinnon's already departed, I gather, so we can't ask him for any comments on that. So I could ask you to depart again, and we will work out what sanctions are appropriate.
Just to clarify, we are once again live.
And just to confirm, for anybody watching, that the conclusion of the committee in both cases was that a formal letter to the member from the chairman of the committee indicated that the failure to comply with the code, and in addition, a request for an apology to Mr. Masters. Yep. Can I just thank everyone for attending? And I'm very pleased that Mr. Child was wrong and we didn't need to go to 10:15.
I was hopeful.
Yes, we'll circulate decision notice.
Yeah, and I'll circulate the decision notice within 5 working days. Yep, can we? That's all right, be put in the deep end.
We just need to let our